Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. If you visited a factory that was still using production systems from the 1950s, you'd wonder what's going on. Why aren't they taking advantage of the best new ideas? Have you visited your old elementary school lately? Our guest today specializes in helping troubled school systems turn around. Hear how he does it today on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Sajan George, school turnaround specialist whose projects include public schools in New Orleans, New York, D.C., and others. Welcome, Sajan.
Thanks for having me.
You got your start in a corporate restructuring firm that was known across the world. Tell me about what turnaround really is. What unique skills are part of the art of turnaround?
So a turnaround is a situation where an entity, an organization, an institution is starting from some level of prominence and heading obviously into not prominence, some level of crisis. And so the art of a turnaround is making that turn, getting it back to that level of rescuing it out of that crisis and reestablishing it so that it can perform again at high levels. And the unique part about that with turnaround firms is you implement that turnaround as part of the fabric of the entity that you are turning around, as part of the management team. So it's not that we're consulting or advising or writing recommendations or thinking of strategies. We take on management roles, interim CEO, CFO, COO. Sometimes we make up a title in order to weave ourselves in, Chief Restructuring Officer. But as part of the management team, you work alongside that management team and try to restructure it and turn it around. So it's part of being part of the entity because we feel that dramatic change, transformative change has to happen inside the organization as part of the organization. It's very difficult to accomplish it as an outsider.
So you don't just swoop in and take over and say, let this happen and that, and then we go away. But you also don't just consult.
You do eventually go away. You sort of work yourself out of a job. But what you end up doing, the people within the organization need to understand, need to know that you have the authority from the board or from the president or whoever to make decisions. And those decisions have to be ultimately be approved by the board or by the CEO or whoever's in authority. But the point is that you have to have the ability to affect change. You can't simply recommend your way through transformative change. You have to actually be willing to lead and stand behind your actions. If I think that doing X plus Y will equal Z, then I have to prove and deliver Z.
And so that has to be okay with the company to take your advice.
Absolutely.
When does an organization, and this can be a company or a school system, a public organization, how do they know when it's time to get outside help?
They usually don't. Sick people don't like to see a doctor.
Right.
And in fact, they're the ones that do. So usually it's people around the entity that clamor for support and for help. It could be a savvy board member. It could be a stakeholder. It could be a group of citizens. It could be in the corporate turnarounds. It's always been an outside influence. In the public school turnarounds, it's usually been a mayor, a school district superintendent, a governor, if you will.
And do you sometimes go into an organization where you don't really know much about what they do? I mean, how often do you have to really start from scratch and learn what their mission is before you can decide how they need to change?
Often. My first school district turnaround was St. Louis back in 2003, and when we got that assignment, we didn't know anything about schools, and we quickly had to learn. One of the things you learn in being a turnaround specialist is you have to have a really steep learning curve, and the way you have that steep learning curve is that A, you listen very, very well to people around you, and B, you build a fact base around what once made this institution great. And why did it fall from that, or how did it fall from that greatness? And you let the facts really, and by listening to people and developing those facts, that becomes your compass, if you will, in developing a turnaround plan.
How do you decide what people to listen to? I'm guessing, and we'll talk about schools, because that's been your specialty in recent years, but do you talk to the students, to the teachers, to the board, to the parents, all of whom might have conflicting views of what's going on?
You do. So you want a fairly comprehensive view. The thing that in terms of determining, well, how do you know if someone's telling you the truth or the right view or what perspective is, you do one of two things. You either say, do you have any facts or data to back up what you're saying? Not I'm challenging you, but I want to understand it better. And also, to the extent that they can't, can I develop or pull or gather facts that backs up what they're saying? Because people will say certain things, but then you look at the data and you say, well, why doesn't the data demonstrate that or back that up? And it can be simple things, but oftentimes you'll find that in any organization, and this applies to school districts, some of the smartest people in that organization are actually 2 or 3 or 4 levels down in the organization, sure, working away very hard, very, very passionate, committed to what they do, but have never had a voice. And unleashing those voices and showing the information they have, and most of the people in the organization know that person's really smart. Well, you start asking questions like, can I get an analysis of, or where could I find data that showed, and they say, well, talk to Larry down in IT. He knows how to run those reports. Mm-hmm. Or how are we training new teachers in terms of how they onboard into our school system? And you have this giant HR department, but everybody in the department says, well, Julie's really the person that designed that and developed that. And you start hearing that name, and often enough you understand, boy, if I was to really draw not the org chart that you gave me, but the true org chart, people like Larry and Julie would really be elevated in the organization because of the influence they have, because of their knowledge and their capacity.
That's great. How should an organization choose a firm to come in, a turnaround firm?
I think a big thing is a couple things: the experience of the people that you're dealing with, their methodology. So how do they go about doing a turnaround? How do they listen? Examples of how they listen. What sort of facts and data? And then look at their track record. Talk to people, other organizations that have used them, and what do they say about them? And truthfully, if they're good, if they're really good, you should find both sides of the coin. You'll find the people that hired them should speak about them in glowing terms. And then you should see a wider array of stakeholders outside of that who won't like them. Because if you're going to do meaningful reform, particularly in an area is highly political like public education, you're going to have more than your fair share of people who don't like what you did because you would have fundamentally changed the status quo. If I hear of a turnaround firm or entity or person where everybody is praising them and there's no criticism,
they probably haven't really changed anything.
They probably haven't changed anything.
I see. One of the more dramatic changeovers was in New Orleans. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So ironically, we the state in Louisiana had recommended to the local school district, New Orleans Parish Schools, which is the public school system there, K through 12, to basically bring in a turnaround firm. The system was, like so many urban public school systems, really dysfunctional. Kids were dropping out, finances were in disarray, operations were incredibly suboptimal, a lack of talent. And my role in that was I was the interim chief operating officer. We actually got there, a team of us, 2.5 months before Katrina hit, not knowing Katrina was going to hit.
Not planning for that.
And I'll tell you, I didn't go to every one of the 100 and some odd schools in the city of New Orleans, but we went to a lot of them in those first 2 months, probably 50 or 60. And if you could have seen the condition of those schools, not both physically, academically, socially, you would have said, boy, the best thing we could do is wipe the slate clean and start over.
So for you, this disaster was not a complete disaster in some ways.
In some ways, in the sense that it created an opportunity. We went from a turnaround to really a startup. And in designing that startup, we began to dream with the state, what's possible? How do we create a new system of education for an entire city, which was kind of exciting. And so literally 3 days after the levees broke, we were in there. We went literally to our headquarters building, got a police escort, climbed up to the 4th floor, went to our mainframe, pulled out some backup tapes with water pouring in the ceiling, water on the floor about this high.
Oh my.
And sent those backup tapes to New York so we could create a backup center.
So you could pay
So we could pay our employees, because they were scattered all around the country, and so we could recreate a system. If you think about it, the entire system was on those backup tapes. If I couldn't get those, I didn't have a system. I didn't have any student records. I didn't have a balance sheet. I didn't have payroll. I didn't have anything. There would be no place to start. So it was important to capture those. Once we did those, we realized we had to look at the condition of our schools and figure out which schools we would bring back. On the West Bank, Algiers was the part of the city that was least hit by the storm. And so we began to rebuild 6 of those schools. We filled operating roles in those schools and began hiring teachers and hiring people. We didn't know where the families would move back. So we're open for business, but we're not sure where the customers are going to reside. So one of the things we decided was we had to create a system where the kids could go to any school, wherever they lived, and we would provide busing. Meaning you couldn't zone kids to their neighborhood school like most cities do, because there was no neighborhood school. There might not even been a neighborhood post-Katrina. And so what happened then, and is still in effect today, is you have an entire city that's based on choice. The schools compete for kids. If they don't do a good job educating those children, they'll go to another school.
And most of these are charter schools now.
About 60% of the schools are charter, 40% are not. There's no other city in America right now that has that kind of proportion.
How was that even possible? I mean, that is an extraordinary circumstance. Did you have to get special permission?
The truth is, we needed as much help as we could get. And so by opening up the marketplace and saying, well, if we're going to allow dollars to follow students and give parents real purchasing power, then we had to complement that purchasing power with real supply. So we opened the marketplace saying, for every child, whatever the per pupil funding is, you can get. And by the way, we'll give you buildings. And we had money from FEMA to restore some really great historic buildings. A lot of them were hit pretty hard, but with FEMA money, we could begin to restore them. So for charter operators, you're giving us per pupil funding, you're giving us a building, you're giving us support. It was a great marketplace.
That's a dream come true for a charter.
And then for charters that are recruiting a lot of teachers, there's some clever marketing that we were able to help be a part of that said, give a year or 2 of your life and be a part of rebuilding some of America's history. And for a lot of young enterprising teachers, that was an exciting thing to be a part of. When I switched from doing corporate turnarounds to public school district turnarounds, all of a sudden everybody's really interested in and wanted to hear, well, so what'd you do this week? Whereas when I was doing corporate turnarounds, it'd be like, okay, that's great, not a lot of questions. But as soon as I started working in the field of public education, people from all kinds of backgrounds were genuinely interested. And I realized this is a real passion for people.
Well, everybody's been to school.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a public school teacher, it seemed to me that everyone in town thought they knew how to fix whatever was wrong with our schools. And I think part of the reason we feel so confident about that is we've been through the system, most of us. So everybody has a theory. Did all the charters work?
No.
I mean, so this has been a competitive, it's continued to be a competitive business.
I mean, the beauty, and I'm not here to be sort of the charter advocate, but the beauty of charter schools is if you fail to perform, and depending your charter is either 3 years or 5 years, you lose your charter. You have to prove that you demonstrated results with the kids that you have. Unlike a typical public school, non-charter, charters are public, but a non-charter public school, it's a monopoly.
Right.
If you talk to your friends and say, what was the worst high school, elementary school when you were growing up? Oh, it was such and such. If you go to that school today, odds are, it's still a lousy school, but it's still in business. The stores are still open.
How do you measure the success of a school? How do you find and set reasonable standards that actually encourage not just baseline performance, but excellence?
It's a great question. So two answers to that. One, it starts and ends with the children. You can't be a great school unless your children are achieving well, meeting academic standards and proficiency. You have to start there. It doesn't. School band is important. The football team is important. Culture, yes, is important. Discipline is important. But if you have all of those things and the kids are still not passing, it's not a great school. Which, amazingly, people don't necessarily always understand that. But the greatness of that school, or how you measure that, which I think is what you're talking about, cannot just be what that end of year test is. Because in the reality for a lot of our public schools, you have kids that are way behind grade level. And so they may not catch up to their grade level in one single academic year.
Sure.
So that end of the year test right now, they're failing because they're not ready. But you take a teacher that has taken a 7th grade class where a bunch of kids were really functionally at the 4th grade, and by the end of that year, she's moved them up to be maybe ready to the 7th grade or end of the 6th grade. That teacher has fundamentally changed the trajectory of those kids' lives. Absolutely. And needs to be credited for that. That is not a failure. That's actually a work in progress and is a great success. And so I think you measure, it has to be some aspect of value-added growth. a baseline that shows from start point to end point what's the value that we added to these students. And you want to see schools that overwhelmingly add a year or more worth of gains to the students that they're serving. You still want an absolute measure to see how far away you are from, obviously, that benchmark, but that can't be the only measure.
And do you find that teachers are more willing to get on board and maybe feel less threatened by that philosophy than the absolute progress standards?
Teachers, when they are engaged in a purposeful and respectful manner, are beginning to understand, actually, this could help me teach. I know those kids are struggling. I don't exactly know how or where to alter my practice to help them. And so using data to differentiate instruction is a way to do that. So
that I might get feedback that says your kids are doing fine with spelling, but not so well with reading comprehension.
Correct.
And you've worked a bit in a hybrid model. I'm going to ask you to tell us about that so that we can talk about how that facilitates that kind of feedback.
I'm ready to launch a hybrid model, a school that combines online learning with traditional face-to-face learning. So every kid in this hybrid school, when we launch it, will have a netbook. On that netbook will be the curriculum. Every student will also have a physical teacher in the classroom and a virtual teacher. And the idea is that we can customize learning to the unique needs of every student, okay? And kids need that because we're not going to be able to have one teaching style, one content, one learning pace, one learning progression for all students in a class. It just doesn't work.
So I was taught that in order to reach all my students, I needed to present material in multiple ways, and that maybe I needed to give them something to read, and we needed to talk, and we needed to have an activity. Does the online learning help you do that more efficiently so the student who's not reached by this method can choose that method instead?
Yeah, so what you were taught is basically the description of a superhero. All right? We want you to be a superhero.
Well, yes.
Stand in front of a class, 25 kids with 25 different learning styles, with 25 different capacities, 25 different backgrounds. Oh, and differentiate instruction for them. Mm-hmm. There is no adult, I shouldn't say there's actually examples of people who do this, but they're heroes. Mm-hmm. They're phenomenal teachers. We cannot build a system of education that rotates around, superheroes, because we're never going to. We have 100,000 public schools, 50 million kids, K through 12 in this country. We're not going to generate that kind of human capital.
We don't have quite enough superheroes.
There isn't. So what this does is it says, look, it's changing the role of the teacher. Instead of you being a master lecturer, okay? In a hybrid school, the curriculum is online. So you don't have to lesson plan as a teacher. You don't have to figure out what to teach next because it moves every kid on their own pace. You don't have to test because it's built in, although you can supplement that with additional testing. You don't have to grade because that's also built in. Well, those four things, lesson planning, figuring out what to teach next, testing and grading, is probably 90% of what a teacher does today, right?
So what's left?
So what's left? Well, in a hybrid school, if you don't have to do that, it frees the teacher up to change their role from being this master content provider to actually being a facilitator of learning.
Like a coach.
Like a coach, like a tutor, like a mentor. You can still do lessons. You can do master. If you have a great lesson on how to teach fractions, absolutely don't. You can bypass the system. But the point is, the system will begin to tell you which kids are on which part of the curriculum, which kids are struggling, and you can go and you can spend time with them. When I've talked to teachers about this, most teachers enter the profession way back whenever they entered it, not so they could create a great lesson plan and deliver it to 25 kids for 50 minutes. They entered because somewhere early in their career, they got to mentor a child. And they saw that light bulb go off and it sparked them. And they went to another child and they were able to get that light and it went off differently. And they loved that. They loved that challenge, they loved that joy. And so what we're trying to do in this hybrid model is to create more opportunities for that magic to happen.
As an English teacher, I'm thinking about two kinds of learning that I'm having trouble fitting into an online content system. How do I learn to appreciate a poem online? And how do I know if the essay I've written is a good essay online?
You can't. What you can do online is you can have children pick from a pre-selected list of poets to hear. But the point is they can hear poetry and something that's meaningful, maybe perhaps even a topic that's meaningful to them. Then they sit and then they write poetry. But here's the thing. You can now share the burden of grading those poems with the virtual teacher. The virtual teacher is a real teacher.
It's a real human. It's
a real human.
Okay.
It's just not physically in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing you can do is as the kids are writing their poems and they have a question, they can submit the question online to the virtual teacher, and the virtual teacher can respond to that question. Or the virtual teacher tell the physical teacher, go over with Sally. She is stuck on, she's been on the first sentence for a long while. I just think if she needs a little bit of help, it'll start to flow because she's got some great ideas.
So this is really team teaching. Is it twice as expensive then to have 2 teachers for each student?
So very good question. So what we've designed the model to be is actually to cost no more than a regular traditional school. The way we do that, even though it's 2 teachers, is you increase the physical class size to do that. That's part of what you have to do. And so some people say, well, isn't class size, lowering class size, the way to go?
But that's really about the attention students receive.
Yes, because what I tell people is, look, in a given class of, say, 25 kids, they're getting 1/25 of that teacher, sort of. The teacher has to spend a fair amount of time presenting the lesson. So if it's a 60-minute class and they spend 45 minutes presenting the lesson, they're getting 1/25 of the final 15 minutes. In the hybrid class, because the curriculum is loaded online, the system can tell the teacher where to spend time with which group of students when. And so what that does is you end up getting far more of a teacher even in a bigger class. Because right now in a traditional bricks and mortar class, most teachers, most good teachers, even ineffective teachers, know who the struggling kids are. Their challenge is, how do I go spend time with that struggling child over here and keep the plate spinning over here?
How do you keep inspiring the kids who are really excelling?
If you were to test kids on the first day of class and you saw a kid that was really advanced, I mean, you know, they're ready to go from single-digit addition to like multiplying fractions. The problem in a bricks and mortar class is we don't have a way to handle that. Maybe we can pull them out once a week or twice a week in a gifted program. On this, we just leapfrog them ahead in the curriculum to where they're ready. And they can keep moving. And we can group other gifted kids with them so they can interact together offline, online, with a virtual teacher, live lesson, not a live lesson, with the physical teacher. But you can group them. And more importantly, you can do the same with the struggling students. What happens today is, in a given class, you have some gifted students, you have some struggling students, you have some students in the middle. And it changes, the kids change for each class depending on the subject. Most of today's teachers, by the batch manufacturing environment that they're in, have to teach to the mean. And so every kid in the classroom, regardless of what your background is, gets taught the same way. And we know that's just not working with kids. It's really differentiated instruction, which is not a new concept. Right. The newness of it is we finally have the technology to do that. We're not relying on superhumans to enable to do that in any kind of scale.
And do you find yourself making midstream adjustments as you get feedback?
The really exciting thing about this, I think, is I'm working with a couple of technology partners, Wireless Generation and Connections Academy. But if you think it in the future, why not have the system be able to take input, not only give the curriculum and give the platform, but take input. If a teacher has a great way to teach a particular lesson on the history of the American flag, we should capture that.
Well, I was going to ask where your content comes from for the online programming.
And if you go online, you're actually seeing a number of providers that are creating content
So good
online.
Stuff's out there already.
Yeah. The problem now is if you've got a really great high school physics teacher, that really great high school physics teacher is benefiting one school, one group of students.
True.
And you've got other schools, potentially, in that same district, like in my home state of Georgia, I think we have over 400 high schools and only 100 certified physics teachers. So there's an opportunity for technology to meet that gap. We're not replacing people.
So then the in-class person maybe wouldn't be certified, but he'd be able to support the content teaching of the online
Correct.
provider.
In that particular example, it's a way to extend the reach of great teachers, but it's also a way to tap into the creativity of if a teacher finds a way to say get through a particular, let's say they've got some English as a second language learners in their classroom, and they're really struggling with some aspect of English, and she figures out a way, and the light bulb goes off. Why shouldn't the whole district benefit from that and access to that? We do this all the time in every other aspect of our society, except public education, and the technology's there. We just haven't merged or bridged it over. And that's the only novel piece, candidly, of the hybrid school, is taking some of the phenomenal things that are happening online and moving that into the bricks and mortar space. In fact, I'm actually making a career change, and I'm going to pursue this hybrid model full time, because I think when people try it, parents are going to say, this is amazing. I don't have to wait for once a year, twice a year for the parent-teacher meeting. I can actually see what my kid is learning every day. My child gets feedback every single day on what they've learned and how they're learning. It progresses with them.
So you've actually done kind of a personal turnaround in your own career work.
It's both a passion and a calling for me. I just see the huge need in the country. We will never ever reach our ideals. We'll never ever be the nation that we can be and the world that we can be if we don't fix our public education system. I fundamentally believe that every child bears the image of God, and that image needs to be fully developed. And what's happened is that in our society, our public education system too often has distorted, broken, fragmented that image, and that happens too often with kids of color and kids of low economic means. And that has to fundamentally change, because that's not the nation we're about.
Great. Thank you. I wish you the best in your work. This is wonderful. My guest today has been Sajan George, School Turnaround Specialist, whose projects include public schools in New Orleans, New York, and DC. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.